She didn't look frightened after the car stopped. She looked satisfied. The white Bentley sat crooked across the crosswalk on West Adams Street, its polished hood gleaming under a thin October rain, while the morning crowd outside the Whitmore Grand Hotel seemed to forget how to breathe. A paper coffee cup rolled slowly along the curb, leaving a pale brown trail across the wet asphalt. A black umbrella spun once near the gutter, abandoned by a woman who had dropped it when the sound of brakes cut through the traffic. And on the white-striped crosswalk, Marcus Ellison sat upright with one hand pressed against the pavement, his brown coat darkened by rain, his face calm in a way that made the scene feel even colder. He did not shout. He did not curse. He simply lifted his eyes toward the driver's window as it lowered with a soft electric hum. Victoria Whitmore leaned out from behind the wheel, diamond earrings catching the gray light, her red lipstick untouched, her expression sharp enough to make the bystanders step back without knowing why. "Maybe next time," she said, her voice carrying over the hiss of rain and idling engines. "He'll learn where he belongs." No one moved for a second. A taxi driver froze with his hand still on the horn. A hotel doorman stood under the brass awning, mouth slightly open, the gold buttons on his uniform shining like small coins. Across the street, inside a narrow coffee shop with fogged windows and a chalkboard sign, Ava Brooks stopped halfway through pouring steamed milk into a paper cup. She had seen everything through the glass. She had seen Marcus step into the crosswalk with the walk signal blinking white. She had seen the Bentley slow, almost stop, and then surge forward just enough to make the intention impossible to mistake. Now her hand trembled around her phone, the recording still running, catching the license plate, the wet street, the stunned silence, and Victoria's smile. Marcus breathed in slowly. Rain gathered on his lashes and slid down the side of his face. His paper bag had split open beside him, scattering a plain blueberry muffin, a folded newspaper, and a small wrapped pastry he had bought for Mr. Collins, the elderly security guard at the Federal Building 2 blocks away. That detail, small and ordinary, sat there in the rain like a quiet accusation. Victoria opened her door and stepped out carefully, not toward Marcus, but toward the front of her car, checking the paint with the offended patience of someone inspecting a scratched handbag. "Do you have any idea what this vehicle costs?" she asked. Her heels clicked against the street, each sound clean and cruel against the wet pavement. Marcus looked at her, then at the signal light, then at the people watching from the sidewalk. His voice came low, steady, almost gentle. "Ma'am, you need to call for help." Victoria gave a short laugh and adjusted the cuff of her cream-colored coat. "Help? For you." A young man near the curb raised his phone higher. Someone whispered, "That was on purpose." Someone else said, "Don't get involved." The hotel doors opened behind Victoria, and 2 men in dark suits appeared, one already reaching for his phone, the other scanning the crowd as if the problem was not what had happened, but who had witnessed it. Ava pushed through the coffee shop door and stepped into the rain, still holding her phone in one hand. "I saw it," she called, her voice shaking but clear. "I recorded it." Victoria turned her head slowly, and for the first time, the smile faded from her face. Not from guilt, from inconvenience. Marcus noticed that too. He noticed everything. The Bentley's position over the crosswalk line, the traffic camera above the corner, the hotel security dome under the awning, the way Victoria's assistants moved to stand between her and the witnesses. He had spent a lifetime listening before speaking, watching before judging, and in that moment, wet pavement beneath his palm and strangers circling at a careful distance, he understood exactly what kind of woman stood in front of him. She was not afraid of consequences because she had never believed consequences were made for people like her. Then the first police siren rose in the distance, thin and approaching, and Victoria lifted her chin as if rescue were coming for her alone. Marcus Ellison had never been the kind of man people noticed twice. At 52 years old, he moved through Washington, D.C. with the quiet patience of someone who had learned long ago that dignity did not need applause. His brown coat was older than some of the young attorneys who passed him each morning near the courthouse, and his leather shoes had been polished so many times the creases looked permanent, like lines on a familiar map. He lived 3 subway stops from the Federal Building in a modest brick townhouse with a narrow porch, a small row of basil plants by the window, and a framed photograph of his late mother on the mantel. Every morning before the city fully woke, He walked the same 6 blocks from Metro Center to the corner coffee shop near West Adams Street, ordered black coffee, a blueberry muffin, and 1 extra pastry wrapped in wax paper for Mr. Collins, the old security guard who worked the early shift. It was not charity. Marcus hated when kindness was treated like charity. To him, it was simply what decent people did when they saw another person carrying a long day in his shoulders. Ava Brooks knew his order before he reached the counter. She also knew he always said please, always waited his turn, and always left $2 in the tip jar even when he only bought coffee. He never wore a badge on the outside of his coat. He never corrected people who assumed he was a clerk, a teacher, a retired bus driver, or just another black man walking alone in a city that measured people by fabric, posture, and price. That morning, before the rain began to fall harder, Ava had watched him stand aside so a mother with a stroller could enter first. She had seen him pick up a dropped napkin from the floor and place it gently in the trash. Small things. Invisible things. The kind of things that told more truth than a biography. "Big day, Mr. Ellison?" she had asked as she slid the paper bag toward him. Marcus had looked at the gray sky beyond the window and smiled softly. "Every day is a big day for somebody, Miss Brooks." Ava had laughed, but there was something in his voice that made the sentence stay with her. He had paid in cash, tucked the wrapped pastry beneath the newspaper in his bag and stepped back into the morning with the steady pace of a man who was not late because he had built his life around never needing to rush. 2 blocks away, the federal courthouse waited behind stone columns and tall glass doors, stern and silent under the low clouds. Marcus knew every shadow in that building, every echo in its marble hallway, every anxious face that entered believing the room would decide whether their lives became lighter or heavier. He believed the law was not a weapon for the powerful or a shelter for the polished. It was supposed to be a table where truth could sit even when truth arrived wet, poor, frightened, or ignored. That belief had cost him friends, promotions, and easy dinners with people who liked justice only when it served them. But Marcus had never regretted it. His mother, Ruth Ellison, had cleaned offices at night for 31 years, and when he was 12 she had told him, "Son, do not ever let the world make you loud just to prove you are real." He carried that sentence like a second heartbeat. So when the Bentley came through the rain and the crowd gathered and Victoria Whitmore looked down at him as if his body had inconvenienced her schedule, Marcus did not give her the anger she expected. He gave her something colder and harder to dismiss. He gave her attention. He watched. He remembered. He breathed through the pain in his side, kept his palm flat against the wet street, and waited for the world around Victoria to show him exactly how far it was willing to bend for a woman who believed money could rewrite what everyone had just seen. Victoria Whitmore had spent 46 years learning that doors opened faster when her name arrived first. In the marble lobby of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, her portrait hung beside a brass plaque thanking her family foundation for its generosity, though half the employees whispered that generosity was only kindness with a photographer present. She was the kind of woman who could make a room adjust its temperature without touching the thermostat. Restaurant managers found her favorite table before she asked. Museum directors laughed at jokes that were not funny. City officials returned her calls before listening to their own voicemail. Her husband, Charles Whitmore, funded campaigns, chaired hospital boards, and smiled beside senators under soft lights. But everyone who knew the family understood that Victoria was the sharper edge of the blade. She remembered every slight, every name, every waiter who moved too slowly, every receptionist who asked for identification, every person who failed to recognize that wealth was supposed to announce itself before she had to speak. That morning, she had woken in a penthouse suite overlooking Pennsylvania Avenue with a schedule printed on ivory paper and placed beside her silver breakfast tray. 10 o'clock donor luncheon. 11:30 legal briefing. 1 o'clock private meeting with a congressional advisor. By 3, her name was supposed to be mentioned in a televised panel about civic responsibility, a phrase she liked because it sounded noble and cost her nothing. She dressed in cream wool, fastened her diamond earrings, and stood before the mirror long enough to decide that the world would see exactly what she wanted it to see. Elegance, control, untouchable calm. But beneath that polish, the morning had already gone wrong. A reporter had called asking about missing funds from the Whitmore Children's Literacy Trust. A junior accountant had stopped answering messages. And her daughter Elena, a second-year law student at Georgetown, had refused to sit beside her at the luncheon, saying she had a federal court observation assignment instead. Victoria had laughed when Elena said it. "You spend too much time around people who think rules are holy," she had told her. "Rules are just fences built by people with less imagination." Elena had not laughed back. That silence had followed Victoria down the private elevator, through the lobby, past the doorman, and into the white Bentley waiting at the curb. By the time she reached West Adams Street, rain had begun to dot the windshield, and traffic had slowed near the courthouse district. The driver had called in sick, so Victoria drove herself, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping impatiently against the console. Then she saw Marcus Ellison at the crosswalk, walking at a measured pace beneath the gray signal light, holding a paper bag as if the entire city had time to wait for him. To anyone else, he was just a man crossing with the signal. To Victoria, already boiling beneath her perfume and pearls, he became something else. An interruption, a symbol, a stranger who did not hurry for her. Her jaw tightened. The Bentley rolled forward. Maybe she told herself he would move faster. Maybe she believed people like him were supposed to step aside when people like her arrived. Or maybe, in the small locked room where her truest thoughts lived, she simply wanted to remind him that some streets still belong to power. Now, standing in the rain while sirens grew louder, Victoria did not see Marcus as a man with a name, a mother, a morning routine, or a destination. She saw a problem to manage. Her first call was not for medical assistance. It was to her attorney. Her second was to her husband's chief of staff. Her third was not a call at all, but a cold glance toward the hotel security camera under the awning, followed by a slight nod to one of the men in dark suits. The message was clear without words. Make this disappear. Ava Brooks stepped into the rain with her phone held tight against her chest, the little red recording, still glowing on the screen like a heartbeat. She was 27, 5'4", and wearing a black coffee shop apron dusted with flour near the pocket, but in that moment she looked taller than the men in suits who were trying to make her afraid. The wet sidewalk shone beneath her sneakers. Steam from the shop door drifted behind her into the cold morning air, carrying the smell of espresso, cinnamon, and toasted bread, ordinary things that suddenly felt out of place beside the white Bentley and the silent crowd. "I saw what happened," Ava said again, louder this time, though her voice shook at the edges. The walk sign was on. He was crossing legally. She saw him. Marcus turned his head slightly toward her, his eyes steady, not pleading, not surprised, just present. Ava had served him coffee for almost 8 months, and in all that time she had never heard him raise his voice, not even when customers cut in front of him, not even when a man once mistook him for a delivery driver and handed him a stack of packages without looking up. Marcus had simply smiled, set the packages on the counter, and said, "Everybody deserves a chance to notice better." That memory flashed through Ava now as Victoria's 2 suited assistants moved closer. One of them, tall with a narrow face and a navy tie darkened by rain, stopped a few feet from her and lowered his voice. "Sweetheart, this is a serious situation. You do not want to involve yourself in something you do not understand." Ava felt her fingers tighten around the phone. "I understand what I recorded." His smile did not reach his eyes. Videos can be misleading. Angles can be confusing. People lose jobs over misunderstandings. Behind him, Victoria stood near the front of her car, speaking into her own phone with the calm confidence of someone ordering flowers for a luncheon. She did not glance at Marcus. She did not ask his name. She spoke in clipped sentences about liability, witnesses, reputation, and someone needing to contact hotel security immediately. The second assistant walked toward the doorman under the brass awning and pointed up at the security camera. The doorman hesitated, his gloved hands folding and unfolding in front of him. Ava saw the hesitation and understood it instantly. Fear moved differently through people who had bills to pay. It did not roar. It whispered. It asked about rent, health insurance, school loans, and whether courage would still feel noble when a manager called you into the office. Ava knew that whisper well. Her younger brother had just started community college in Maryland. Her mother's prescriptions cost more than the electricity bill. She needed the job behind her, the paycheck, the quiet routine of opening the shop at 6 in the morning, and making small talk with strangers who sometimes remembered to say thank you. But she also knew what she had seen. The Bentley had not lost control. The street had not been chaotic. Marcus had not jumped. Victoria had looked at him and chosen not to stop soon enough. Ava swallowed, thumb hovering over the screen. The assistant took one more step. "Delete it," he said softly. Marcus's voice came from the pavement, low but clear enough to cut through the rain. "Miss Brooks, do not argue with him." Ava looked at him, startled. "But Mr. Ellison, they are trying to scare me." Marcus drew a careful breath, his hand still resting flat against the wet street. "Then give the truth somewhere safe to stand." Ava blinked, then understood. She turned slightly away from the assistant, opened her messages, and sent the video to herself, to her manager, and to her cousin who worked nights at a local news station. The progress circle spun slowly, painfully slowly, while the siren grew closer and Victoria's assistant stared at her phone as if he could stop the upload with his eyes. Then the circle vanished. Sent. Ava lowered the phone, rain sliding down her face, and for the first time since stepping outside, her voice stopped shaking. "It is already backed up," she said. The assistant's expression hardened. Victoria ended her call and turned toward Ava, finally seeing her not as a waitress, not as background but as a threat. The first patrol car rolled to the curb, blue lights spilling across the wet street, and everyone seemed to inhale at once. Officer Daniel Price stepped out of the patrol car with his shoulders squared and one hand resting near his radio, the blue lights washing over the wet street in hard flashes. He was in his late 30s, clean-shaven, broad through the chest, with the careful expression of a man who had already decided the shape of the story before hearing all of it. His partner moved toward the traffic lane to hold back cars, while Price looked first at the Bentley, then at Victoria Whitmore, then at Marcus Ellison sitting on the edge of the crosswalk with rain darkening his coat. That order mattered. Marcus noticed it. Ava noticed it too. Victoria walked toward the officer before he could ask a question, her voice suddenly softer, almost fragile, as if she had rehearsed concern in the space between the siren and the curb. "Officer, thank goodness. He came out of nowhere. I tried to stop, but he was already in front of me." She touched a hand to her chest, diamonds flashing. "Under the gray light. I was terrified." Price nodded once, the kind of nod people give when the speaker looks expensive enough to be believed. "Ma'am, please step over here where it is safe." Ava moved forward immediately. "That is not what happened. I have video." Price lifted a hand without looking at her. "Miss, I will get to you in a moment." "You need to get to me now," Ava said, trying to keep her voice steady. She saw him. She moved forward anyway. Victoria's face tightened, but only for a second. "That girl works at the coffee shop," she said, as though employment were evidence against character. "She has been shouting since before you arrived." Ava's cheeks warmed in the cold rain. Marcus shifted slightly, his breathing measured, one palm pressed against his side. "Officer," he said calmly, "there are multiple cameras at this intersection. The hotel camera under the awning, the traffic camera above the signal, and at least one phone recording from a witness. You should secure them before anyone has access." Price finally turned fully toward him, and something in his eyes changed, not into concern but irritation. "Sir, I need you to stay seated and let us handle this." "I am seated," Marcus said, "and I am asking you to preserve evidence." Victoria gave a small, humorless laugh. "Listen to him. He sounds like he is already building a lawsuit." A few people in the crowd murmured. One man lowered his phone. Another stepped backward beneath an umbrella, suddenly remembering an appointment somewhere else. Price looked at Marcus's worn shoes, his wet paper bag, the pastry ruin near the curb, and then back at Victoria's cream coat and polished Bentley. The silence between those glances said more than his words. "Sir, did you enter the roadway outside the designated crossing area?" Marcus looked up at the white walk signal still blinking above them. "No." "Did you approach the vehicle aggressively?" "No." Ava stepped closer. "He was walking. That is all." "He was walking." Price's jaw tightened. "Miss, step back." Victoria's first assistant returned from the hotel entrance, speaking quietly into his phone. The doorman avoided Ava's eyes. The little black dome of the security camera remained pointed down at the crosswalk, silent and still. Marcus watched the assistant slide his phone into his jacket and understood that the machine of influence had already begun to turn. It did not need to run fast. It only needed to run before truth could breathe. Price crouched slightly in front of Marcus, not unkindly, but not gently either. "Sir, we have a report that you may have caused a traffic hazard. For everyone's safety, I need to make sure this does not escalate." Marcus held his gaze. It escalated when she chose not to stop. Victoria inhaled sharply, offended less by the accusation than by the fact that he had spoken it in public. Price stood. "All right. Place your hands where I can see them." Ava froze. "Wait. He is the one who needs help." "Ma'am, step back now." Marcus slowly lifted his hands, palms open, rain sliding along his fingers. He did not resist. He did not raise his voice. Price placed one hand restraint around Marcus's wrist, securing him to the metal rail beside the curb rather than pulling him to his feet. The click was quiet, almost swallowed by rain, but it landed across the crowd like a verdict spoken too soon. Ava stared at the silver cuff, then at Victoria, who looked away while carefully smoothing the front of her coat. Marcus closed his eyes for one breath, not from fear, but from the heavy familiarity of being treated as dangerous while sitting still. When he opened them, his voice was low enough that only Ava and Price could hear. "Officer, your body camera is recording." Price paused. Marcus continued, calm as stone underwater. "Please make sure it records everything." For the first time, Price looked uncertain. Then Victoria's phone rang, and she answered with a faint smile returning to her mouth. "Charles," she said, turning from the crowd. "It is being handled." The rain softened until it became almost soundless, a thin silver mist settling over West Adams Street, the kind that blurred the edges of cars and faces and made the whole city look like it was holding its breath. Marcus sat beside the curb with one wrist secured to the metal rail, his coat heavy with water, his ruined paper bag near his shoe, and the wrapped pastry for Mr. Collins slowly coming apart in the gutter. Around him, people kept their distance in that careful American way, close enough to watch, too far to feel responsible. Phones hovered at chest level. Umbrellas tilted. Traffic crawled past in one open lane, drivers slowing just long enough to stare before disappearing into the gray morning. Ava stood a few feet away, soaked through her apron, her phone clutched in both hands as if it were a fragile light she was trying to keep alive. Officer Price spoke into his radio, his voice lower now, more controlled than confident. Victoria remained beneath the brass hotel awning, dry except for the hem of her cream coat, surrounded by her assistants like a woman being protected from weather rather than consequence. Marcus could feel the cold metal at his wrist. He could feel the ache in his side, the stiffness beginning to settle into his shoulder, the dampness at the back of his collar. But he let none of it climb into his voice. Pain was information. Humiliation was atmosphere. Neither one had permission to become his character. He looked toward Ava and saw the tremor in her mouth, the anger she was trying to swallow because anger from someone like her would be used as evidence against her. He knew that training. He had seen it in courtrooms, sidewalks, school offices, airport gates, bank lobbies, and quiet conference rooms where the truth had to dress itself carefully just to be allowed inside. "Miss Brooks," he said gently. Ava stepped closer at once. "Yes, Mr. Ellison? Breathe before you speak to them." Her eyes glistened, whether from rain or frustration he could not tell. "They are making it look like you did something wrong." Marcus looked down at the shining street, where red and blue lights stretched across puddles like broken stained glass. "That is why you must not help them by losing yourself." Ava pressed her lips together. The words landed in her chest heavier than comfort, because they were not telling her everything would be fine. They were telling her to remain whole even if it was not. Marcus turned his gaze toward Officer Price, who was now listening to Victoria's assistant speak quietly beside the patrol car. The assistant's hand moved in small, polished gestures offering names, connections, explanations, maybe promises without calling them promises. Price nodded once, then looked toward the hotel camera again. Marcus watched the officer's eyes flicker. Doubt had entered him, but it had not yet become courage. That was the quietest tragedy of the morning. Not everyone participating in injustice looked cruel. Some simply looked uncertain, tired, eager to keep their shift from becoming complicated. The mist collected on Marcus's eyelashes. He remembered his mother's kitchen in Baltimore, the smell of cornbread cooling on the counter, her hands rough from cleaning offices where people called her by the wrong name and left coffee rings on desks she had already wiped twice. "Son," she used to say, "some folks mistake softness for surrender because they have never seen strength without a fist." He had not understood it then. He understood it now. Victoria glanced over from beneath the awning, and for one brief second their eyes met. She expected hatred. She expected fear. She expected him to shrink under the weight of her money, her whiteness, her connections, her ability to turn a public street into a private negotiation. Marcus gave her none of it. He simply looked at her as one human being looking at another who had forgotten what that meant. The absence of rage unsettled her more than shouting would have. She looked away first. Ava noticed, and something in her shoulders changed. She stopped shaking. She wiped rain from her cheek with the back of her hand, opened her phone again and checked the sent messages. The video was safe. The truth had somewhere to stand. Marcus saw it and gave the smallest nod. Then, from the direction of the federal courthouse 2 blocks away, a black sport utility vehicle turned onto West Adams Street and slowed beside the police lights. It did not honk. It did not flash anything dramatic. It simply arrived with the quiet authority of people who did not need to announce themselves twice. The rear door opened. A man in a charcoal overcoat stepped out, holding a long black garment bag, carefully over one arm. His face changed the instant he saw Marcus by the curb. The color drained from it. He crossed the wet street fast, ignoring Victoria, ignoring the assistants, ignoring Officer Price's raised hand. "Your Honor." Samuel Reed's voice cracked through the mist, stunned and unmistakable. "Judge Ellison, what happened?" The street went silent in a way even rain could not soften. Samuel Reed stopped so abruptly near the curb that the garment bag slipped halfway from his arm, revealing the black sleeve of a judicial robe folded neatly inside. For one suspended second, no one understood what they were seeing. Then Officer Price's face changed. It was not dramatic at first, just a tightening around the eyes, a small loss of color beneath the rain, the slow realization of a man hearing a word that rearranged every fact he thought he had already sorted. "Judge," Ava whispered, her voice barely louder than the mist. Marcus looked up at Samuel with the same calm expression he had worn since the sirens arrived. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." Samuel stared at the hand restraint on Marcus's wrist, then at Officer Price, then back at Marcus as if his mind refused to place those things in the same frame. "Your Honor, the hearing is scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. The deputy clerk has been calling. The courtroom is full." Victoria, still beneath the awning, went perfectly still. Her phone remained pressed to her ear, but she had stopped speaking. Her husband's voice buzzed faintly from the speaker, asking what was happening, asking why she had gone quiet. She lowered the phone slowly. Across the sidewalk, her daughter Elena Whitmore emerged through the hotel doors with a leather case over one shoulder and a stack of legal notebooks pressed to her chest. She had been on her way to the courthouse observation assignment, irritated with her mother, late because the lobby had been blocked by police lights. Then she saw Marcus by the curb. Her footsteps faltered. She had seen him before from the back row of a federal courtroom, seated high beneath the seal of the United States, patient, precise, feared by dishonest attorneys and loved by clerks who said he never humiliated anyone who came before him in good faith. Her voice left her in a thin, broken breath. "Mom," Elena said, not looking away from Marcus. "That is Judge Ellison." The name moved through the crowd like an electric current. People repeated it in fragments. Judge Ellison. Federal judge. His courtroom. The phones that had been lowering rose again. Officer Price looked toward his body camera as if he had suddenly remembered it was not just a piece of equipment, but a witness with no loyalty to embarrassment. Victoria stepped forward, the first real crack in her polish appearing at the edge of her mouth. "This is absurd," she said, though the sentence came out weaker than she intended. "He should have identified himself." Marcus turned his head toward her. "I was crossing the street, Mrs. Whitmore. I was not required to present credentials to be treated as a person." The words did not land loudly. They landed cleanly. Even the doorman under the awning lowered his eyes. Samuel moved closer to Marcus, careful and controlled, his training trying to hold back his anger. "Officer, remove that restraint immediately." Price hesitated for only a fraction of a second, But it was enough for everyone to see the hesitation had not been procedure. It had been fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of Victoria. Fear of the machine around her. He unlocked the cuff from the rail, then from Marcus's wrist, his fingers less steady than before. "Your Honor, I did not realize." Marcus gently flexed his hand, the skin marked by pressure but not broken. "That is exactly the problem, Officer Price." Silence spread again, deeper this time. Victoria's assistant took 2 slow steps backward, as if distance could erase his earlier threats. Ava lifted her phone and began recording openly now, no longer hiding the screen against her apron. Elena looked at her mother, and something young and loyal inside her seemed to split painfully down the middle. "Mom," she said, "tell me you did not know." Victoria did not answer. That was the answer. A federal marshal from the sport utility vehicle approached and spoke quietly with Samuel, who nodded toward the hotel camera, the traffic signal, and Ava's phone. The morning reorganized itself. What had been treated as a nuisance became evidence. What had been treated as a witness became essential. What had been treated as a man to manage became a judge whose name was already carved into the schedule of the courthouse 2 blocks away. But Marcus did not rise with triumph. He accepted Samuel's help to stand, slowly, carefully, his wet coat hanging heavy from his shoulders. He looked first at Ava. "Miss Brooks, thank you for staying." Ava swallowed hard. "You told me to give the truth somewhere safe to stand." Marcus nodded once. "And you did." Then he looked at Elena, whose eyes had filled with tears she refused to let fall. He knew that look too. It was the look of someone watching the person who raised them become a stranger in public. His voice softened. "Miss Whitmore, the truth is not your enemy, even when it hurts." Victoria's jaw tightened as if kindness were an insult she did not know how to answer. In the distance, the courthouse bells marked the hour. Samuel lifted the garment bag again, the black robe inside dark against the gray morning, and for the first time, Victoria understood that the man she had tried to reduce had spent his life inside the very system she was now about to face. Inside the federal courthouse, the morning did not slow down for anyone's shock. Marble floors still reflected the ceiling lights. Elevators still opened with soft chimes. Attorneys still whispered over folders in the hallways, unaware that 2 blocks away, a street corner had just become the first page of a much larger truth. Marcus Ellison entered through the side door with Samuel Reed beside him and a federal marshal a few steps behind, his wet coat replaced by a plain dark jacket from Chambers, his wrist marked but his face composed. He refused the wheelchair offered by building security, not out of pride, but because he did not want the first image people saw to be injury. He wanted them to see order returning without cruelty. In his chambers, the room smelled faintly of old paper, lemon polish, and rain carried in from the street. Samuel placed the black robe across the back of a chair, but Marcus did not put it on. Not yet. On the desk lay the docket for the 11:30 hearing. United States Inquiry into Whitmore Children's Literacy Trust. Marcus looked at the name in silence. For months, the case had moved toward this morning with documents, sealed motions, bank records, and careful questions about whether charitable funds had been quietly redirected into political favors. Victoria Whitmore was not listed as a defendant, not formally, but her signature appeared in enough places to make her shadow visible in every file. Samuel watched his face. "Your Honor, given what happened outside, you cannot preside over this hearing now." Marcus nodded. "I know." There was no anger in the words, only the weight of duty. "Prepare an immediate recusal memorandum. Personal involvement in a related incident creates an appearance issue. The case must be reassigned." Samuel blinked. "After what she did, you are stepping away?" Marcus looked toward the tall window where rain traced thin lines down the glass. "Especially after what she did. The law cannot become personal just because the wound is personal." Samuel lowered his eyes, ashamed of having expected anything smaller from him. Downstairs, the evidence began to gather without needing Marcus to push it. Ava Brooks arrived with her manager and her cousin from the local news station, her phone sealed in a clear evidence bag after she gave a formal statement. The traffic camera footage showed the crosswalk signal, the Bentley's movement, and the distance clearly enough that even Officer Price stopped trying to explain the morning away. The hotel security footage, which one assistant had tried to delay releasing, was preserved after a federal marshal requested it through proper channels. The Bentley's onboard data recorded acceleration, braking time, and speed in miles per hour, each number cold and indifferent to wealth. Victoria sat in a conference room off the lobby with Charles Whitmore on speakerphone, and two attorneys speaking over each other. For the first time that morning, no one asked whether she was comfortable. They asked where she had been looking. They asked why she called counsel before emergency services. They asked why her assistant contacted hotel security before police finished taking statements. Each question touched her polished world like rain finding cracks in stone. She tried to say it was confusion. She tried to say she was afraid. But fear did not explain the smile Ava had recorded. Fear did not explain the comment on the street. Fear did not explain Elena standing outside the conference room, pale and silent, holding the legal notebooks that suddenly felt heavier than books. When Elena finally stepped inside, Victoria reached for her with a rehearsed softness. "Honey, this is all being twisted." Elena did not move closer. "I heard what you said." Victoria's eyes hardened for 1 second before she remembered there were attorneys in the room. "You are my daughter." Elena swallowed, her voice breaking but clear. "That is why I kept hoping I misunderstood you." The words emptied the room more completely than shouting could have. Hours later, Marcus signed the recusal order and transferred the Whitmore matter to another federal judge. Then he signed a separate statement documenting only what he personally experienced. Nothing more, nothing embellished, nothing sharpened for revenge. Samuel stood beside the desk, watching the pen move steadily across the paper. "Do you want to add anything else?" Marcus paused, then shook his head. "The truth does not need decoration." Outside, rain finally stopped. A thin band of sunlight reached the courthouse steps, touching the wet stone, the flag, and the place where strangers would soon walk in carrying their own fears. Marcus looked at the light for a long moment. He had been wronged, but he would not let wrongdoing teach him to worship power. That was the quiet victory Victoria could not understand. She had tried to make him small on a public street. Instead, she had revealed the size of the law when it belonged to everyone. 3 weeks later, the courtroom was quieter than anyone expected. There were no raised voices, no dramatic speeches, no polished donors waiting near the front row with practiced smiles. Just wood, light, paper, and the low breathing of people who understood that reputation had finally met a room it could not purchase. Victoria Whitmore stood at the defense table in a navy dress that looked expensive but no longer powerful. Without the cream coat, the diamonds, the Bentley, and the hotel awning around her, she seemed smaller, not because the court had diminished her, but because the court had removed everything she used to appear larger than other people. Charles Whitmore sat 2 rows behind her, his face stiff, his hands folded so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Elena sat farther back, alone, a legal pad on her lap, her pen still untouched. She had not come to protect her mother. She had come to understand what protection had cost other people. Ava Brooks entered through the witness door wearing a simple black blazer borrowed from her cousin. Her hair was pulled back, her phone records had already been submitted, and her voice, when she gave her statement, did not shake. She spoke of the walk signal, the rain, the Bentley's slow movement, Victoria's words, the men who approached her, and the moment Marcus told her to give the truth somewhere safe to stand. She did not add anger. She did not decorate the facts. And because she did not, the facts filled the room by themselves. Officer Daniel Price testified after her. He looked different out of uniform, more tired, less certain, carrying the burden of his own body camera footage like a mirror he could not turn away from. He admitted he had made assumptions. He admitted he had failed to treat witness testimony with equal weight. He admitted that status had influenced the speed of his belief. When he said those words, Marcus Ellison sat in the back row, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He was not on the bench. He was not wearing the robe. Another federal judge presided, a woman with silver hair and a voice as measured as falling snow. Marcus had chosen the back of the room because justice did not need him elevated to be real. At one point, Victoria turned and saw him there. For the first time since that morning, she did not look angry. She looked lost, as if she had spent her whole life speaking a language the room had finally stopped translating for her. During a recess, Elena walked over to Marcus. She stood beside the aisle for several seconds before speaking. "I am sorry," she said, barely above a whisper. Marcus looked at her, not as the daughter of the woman who had humiliated him, but as a young person standing in the wreckage of an inheritance she had not chosen. "You are responsible for what you do next," he said gently, not for what she refused to learn. Elena nodded once, and the tears she had been holding finally slipped down her face. She wiped them quickly, then returned to her seat and opened her legal pad for the first time. By late afternoon, sunlight crossed the tall windows and settled on the brass seal behind the bench. The judge read her ruling with no cruelty in her tone. The case would move forward. Evidence would remain preserved. Attempts to interfere with witnesses would be examined separately. Victoria's influence, once invisible and everywhere, had become visible enough to answer for. No one cheered. No one needed to. The gavel came down once, a clean sound against polished wood, and the room seemed to exhale. Outside the courthouse the rain was gone. The sidewalk had dried except for a few dark seams between the stones. Ava paused at the steps, looking up at the flag moving gently in the evening wind. Officer Price walked past her, stopped and said, "Miss Brooks, I should have listened." Ava studied him for a moment, then answered, "Next time listen sooner." He nodded and kept walking. Marcus came out last, carrying a fresh paper bag from the same coffee shop. Inside was a blueberry muffin and a pastry wrapped carefully in wax paper. Mr. Collins waited near the security desk, pretending not to smile. Marcus handed it to him without ceremony. Then he turned toward West Adams Street, where ordinary people were crossing under the white walk signal, briefcases in hand, children beside them, strangers passing strangers without knowing the stories they carried. Marcus stood there for a moment, feeling the cool air against his face. No speech rose in him. No victory needed to be claimed. Across the street, Ava lifted her hand in a small wave. Elena watched from the courthouse steps, her notebook pressed to her chest. Somewhere behind them the doors closed softly. The city moved on, but not unchanged. And in the quiet space between the fading light and the next green signal, justice sounded less like thunder and more like a breath finally released.